Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, come on. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. My name is Layla. I'm from the Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship, IIE for short. And I am so glad today that I see so many familiar faces. Okay? A very good evening to our distinguished speakers, Mr. Ashok Rao, Mr. Anil Kathod, our guest moderator, Mr. Ravi Manta, fellow colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's distinguished speaker series organized jointly by SMU IIE and TIE. I am Layla, your MC for this evening, and evangelist for SMU IIE. Today we are fortunate because usually for such platforms we only have one speaker. I am just so pleased today that we have two. Okay? Our first speaker is Mr. Ashok Rao, who will be sharing with us on angel investments for ventures in emerging economies. Ashok Rao is a serial entrepreneur with 5 successful high-technology startups. He took one of them public, IPO, with a market cap in excess of $400 million. Ashok is also the chairman of and CEO of Houdini Inc., developing cutting-edge softwares for enterprises, utilizing artificial intelligence and sense-making. Incidentally, he's also the chairman of the TIE Global Board of Trustees. TIE is the world's largest organization of entrepreneurs. Ashok was one of the first Indian American to take a company public on NASDAQ, and in 2007, he was awarded the Distinguished Alumnus Award for Entrepreneurial Achievement from his alma mater, Marquette University. As CEO, he produced 3 award-winning feature films released in 2008 over 2009. Among many other accolades, Ashok is also the angel investor in high tech, as I mentioned earlier. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Ashok Rao up on stage. Ashok, please.
Thank you, Layla. I love it when someone warms up the crowd for you, so if I tell you good evening, you don't need to reply back, at least this time. It's great to be here. It was about 10 years ago in one of my previous lives, I used to have an office in Singapore. Love to come here. One is because I got to sell a lot of good stuff to Singapore Telecom, Singtel. In fact, if you drive down the PIE, you see some of those great big earth stations, those big antennas. Well, a couple of those came from my company. So I used to come here for 2 things. One is to sell Singtel earth stations, and the other was to have pepper crab. I'm back here, and at least I've been able to accomplish one of those 2 things 10 years later, which is to have pepper crab. I haven't been able to sell one darn thing to anybody in the last 3 days, so that's a different story. When I was asked to speak here tonight, Layla first suggested the topic called My Journey. My first reaction was, how boring. My second reaction is that as a public speaker, as a professional speaker that I have been, I don't speak about myself. It's sort of like in Texas we call it, you don't drink your own whiskey. You don't get your own press clippings. And I like to put it, you don't shave Superman every morning in the mirror. Now, Karan would not have that problem. But the man you meet in the mirror every morning shouldn't be Superman. Sort of reminds me of a story about the turkey and the bull. There was a turkey and a bull that belonged to a farmer. And one day the turkey looked up at the tree and saw a grand eagle sitting at the top and got very depressed and turned to the bull and said, you know, wouldn't it be nice for me to be up there? I'm a turkey. I don't have energy. I don't have wings. I can't be sitting on top of the tree. And the bull says, don't worry. I eat a lot of great stuff. My droppings are packed with nutrients. So peck on my droppings and you might get some energy. So the turkey says nothing to lose. He nibbles on some of the dung, and all of a sudden he has energy and he jumps to the first branch. Nibbles some more, jumps to the second. Finally, he's able to get right to the top of the tree, and he feeling like an eagle looking at the whole farm. When the farmer walks by, sees him on the top of the tree, pulls out a gun and shoots him dead. Moral of the story? Bullshit can get you to the top, but won't keep you there. So, talking about yourself is kind of like that bullshit. However, to sort of accommodate Layla, I have a little section at the end of this thing called My Lessons Learned. So at least I don't have to tell you about successes, because you can read about them. She's already talked about them. I can tell you about all the mistakes I've made and the lessons I've learned from them. Getting to tonight's topic, so instead of my journey, we settled on angel investments in emerging economies. I don't think Singapore is truly an emerging economy. It's got a GNI per capita that rivals any Western country, and it's pretty stable, and it's a small country in terms of size, so it's got a lot of good things going for it, but yet there are a lot of similarities to in Singapore to what's happening in the rest of the emerging market world. So when we talk about emerging markets, the thing to remember is that the fuel for national prosperity, for business growth, is small business. The US has realized it. In fact, they realized it 200 years ago. And many other countries are realizing it too. Small businesses are the engine for job creation and wealth creation and national prosperity, because governments have to wake up to this fact that it's small business that drives economic prosperity. Singapore has put a lot of programs in place, and many of the ASEAN countries have done the same. But making it easier for startups doesn't really mean that the government can do it on their own. The government has to sometimes get out of the way and allow early stage financing to come from other sources. So there's a need for early stage financing, and it also, in most emerging markets, is a problem. Entrepreneurs are the ones that really start small businesses. And they have this attitude that they're just going to go get a company started, get it going, take the risk. In the United States, it has really been the main driver for job creation. 10 million net new jobs in the last 18 years have come from small business. Actually, large business, large enterprises have lost jobs. It's been the small business that has created jobs, and they launch about 500,000 jobs per year. Allows the US to be a little more competitive globally, and allows business to regenerate itself, because incumbents and monopolies do get challenged. However, even more so than the United States, the BRIC countries, if you take a look at Brazil, Russia, India, and China, known as the BRIC countries, have had a dramatic impact on the world's economy. China is the second largest economy in the world, and who would have thunk that 20 years ago? They have created, or are in the process of creating every year, 22 million new jobs, half of which come from India. Kind of a startling statistic, actually. And the developed world creates less than 4 million new net jobs per year. And in context, it's 22 million out of these 4 countries. And it's created by entrepreneurs. And not everyone can be an entrepreneur. People say, can I grow somebody into being an entrepreneur? And my theory is, no, because it's a randomly distributed risk gene. When I've used the word gene with random, people, the biologists and all, will argue, hey, a gene is inherited. How can you call it a gene? Well, okay, so I'll call it a virus instead. But it is random. And anecdotally, that's my anecdotal information tells me it's about 3% of the world's population is infected by this virus. And it's random. For instance, my 2 brothers, we have 3 brothers, who are much smarter than me. One's a PhD in AI, one's a double doctor. But boy, are they risk averse. 56 miles an hour on the highway is risky. Me, I've got 2 radar detectors built into my car, so that I can test the limits of not only my car, but also the police. So It's not something that is inherited. It's not something that's genetic. It's random, and it finds itself anywhere and everywhere. And with this comes this irresistible urge to create something that's your own. But what government can do is kill it. That's what government does best, is kill this, beats the heck out of you till you just have lost all entrepreneurial desire. And I think some of that is here in Singapore. Because one, the government is so benevolent, so powerful, so all-seeing, that the natural entrepreneur says, no, gee, maybe I'll go work for Singtel. Or maybe I'll go work for the government. Or maybe I'll work for one of these investment firms that's funded by the government. Which is sort of counterintuitive to a guy like me who has 2 radar detectors in my car. But what government can do is create rules and regulations that get out of the way of entrepreneurs, have strong rule of law. And I'll tell you a story of my own. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made in my life was to invest in a company in Russia in 1993. I got conned by Boris Yeltsin. He came through Seattle and he met all of us and said, invest in Russia. So we went and invested in Russia, bought a phone company there in the Far East, and lost our shirt. Lost everything, because the rule of law and the sanctity of contracts did not exist at that time. And it was just the worst mistake I've ever made in my life. $30 million mistake. And the other way of government getting out of the way, the excellent example is of India. In 1991, India was about to go bankrupt. It was about to default. And the government slowly woke up to the fact that they were in the way. And so they liberalized the economy. Not completely. It's still a tough place to start a business. But then, since 1991, look what's happened. It's now considered an economic juggernaut and has probably the world's largest middle class because, well, it has a lot of people, and 1/3 of a lot of people is still a lot of people. But it is a very vibrant middle class, and it buys, and therefore it's fueling the economy because the government got out of the way, sort of. It's still sort of in the way, and in fact, the funny story, it reminds me of, I was in Bombay the other day, and here was this gorgeous 5-star hotel. But the road to the hotel didn't exist. Potholes and dirt. And so I met the general manager of the hotel, and I said, yeah, you've put in millions of dollars into this hotel, and we can't get to it. Why did you build it? He said, if I had to wait for the government to build my road, I'd never build this hotel. So he went ahead and did it anyway. So in spite of itself, countries like are succeeding because the government tends to be in the way. So we need to create an environment. It's a combination of private business and government, particularly in emerging economies where government has a powerful influence on where an economy goes, much more so than in mature economies like a United States or a France or a Germany, where the environment not only encourages risk, but rewards the taking of risk. So let's play a word game about entrepreneurs. When we say entrepreneur, what comes to mind? Job creator, creative person, hard worker, courageous. Typically, a small company builds nice teams, gambler at times, but most importantly, changes lives, changes the way people live. Because if you look back the last 200 years, our lives have changed because of entrepreneurs. Think about Thomas Edison. We all light this place up because of him. We fly because 2 guys in the back of their bicycle garage built an airplane, the Wright brothers. We feed the world because Cyrus McCormick built the Reaper. And these were not big companies in those days. These were 1-man jobs, 2-man jobs in the back of their garage or back of their shed, building something and then creating a business around it. This revolution repeated itself 50 years ago, when in the latter half of the 20th century, entrepreneurs, who I now call legends in their own time, changed the way we live. Mark Zuckerberg, the latest example of changing the way we live, and Layla's point about how to send questions into us through pigeonhole.sg, it's changing the way we live. And it's entrepreneurs, small businesses that became big. In fact, think about Ray Kroc and McDonald's, the much hated McDonald's, the McDonald's that sits on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Every Frenchman hates it but goes and has a burger. Started with one little burger place in San Diego. So entrepreneurs drive prosperity, drive innovation, and we're here in the center of innovation. Isn't this the place in SMU, the center of innovation? If you're an entrepreneur, you innovate. Otherwise, you die. And you live this life of euphoria to terror every heartbeat. One moment you're euphoric, you got the order, next moment you're terrorized because you can't make payroll this coming Friday. And then back to euphoria because you collect a check. That's the life of the entrepreneur. But ideas alone and innovation alone is not enough for successful entrepreneurship and job creation and wealth creation. Need to start somewhere. I meet two groups of entrepreneurs. By the way, in this audience, who considers themselves an entrepreneur? Show of hands. Wow. It's more than 3%. Who would like to be an entrepreneur who's not one right now? That's the rest of the room. Well, you don't have to do it for me, but that's great stuff. But to be able to start a company, you need funding. And if you look at the classic shape of a business life cycle, you start with needing lots of money. You have gestation period, you build your prototypes. Business starts to take off. But what about that period where you need money to get to the point where the business can take off? Well, that's when you need external funding. The first source of funding can come from family and friends, sometimes also known as fools. You can bootstrap. You can max out your credit cards. You can clean out your savings account. You can look to the government for assistance, which happens a lot in this country. You can go to mentors and ask for money and help. Of course, you don't take any salary. That's what comes to mind when you try to start a business. But where does the money come from? You can start with your own resources. You can go to friends and family and fools. You can go to angel investors. This is the sequence, and we'll talk about how these all fit into a business cycle. Private equity, banks and lenders, and banks will only come to you when they get 3 times the collateral and they're quite safe that they're going to get paid back, and you've got to sign personal guarantees. And eventually, public markets. Cheapest source of capital is the public market. And if you overlay that series of sources of funding on the business life cycle, you can see founders have to rely on friends, family, and fools to start the business or themselves. And then in the later stage come venture capitalists, professional money managers, but there's a hole in the middle. And this is where typically, at least in the United States, where you've got vibrant entrepreneurial ecosystems, you have this category of angel investor, the topic that I've been asked to talk about. I finally get to it, right? And this angel investor is the one that provides that gap capital between your own money and getting professional money. So you start with the entrepreneur. He has to go find his own money. He's not a professional investor. Cleans out his checking account, maxes out his credit cards, raises funds from family and friends, and relies less on institutions that exist in the economy, in the market. Institutions like the rule of law, like the IRS, the taxing authorities. And oftentimes, if the environment is not business startup friendly, they go join the parallel market, sometimes known as the black market. In the US, it's not good to use that term, so we call it the emerging parallel market. Unless local institutions improve, and unless the environment gets business ready. So this is the first investor, or herself, who says, okay, I'm going to start this business. The next is the angel, or the angel investor. They're not professional investors. And the difference between an angel and venture capitalist is an angel invests his own money and provides mentoring and help to the founder. Typically, they don't take control over the business, and they invest beyond money what I call soft capital. They invest time, effort. They make their network of contacts available to those founders. That's the angel, second stage of funding. And finally, you get to the venture capitalist. And these venture capitalists I call vulture capitalists. They're similar to angels in that they invest in other people's companies. Entrepreneurs invest in their own companies. Angels and VCs invest in other people's companies. And they typically do it in the later stage. Again, remember the curve I showed you. It's while you are actually validating your business model. That's the favorite statement of most venture capitalists. Validate your business model and I'll put money in. Meaning you've got to prove to them that you can generate the revenue you think you can. At least start it with some sort of customer base. They're very tough. They exit early, and that's why we call them vulture capitalists. Sort of reminds me of another story. You guys are ready for a story? Because we've been talking a lot of heavy stuff here. Well, there was this young man, entrepreneur, finally gets an appointment with the venture capitalists. He polishes up his presentation, and he's ready to go the next day when suddenly he gets struck with a terrifying thought. He doesn't know what to wear. So he goes to his accountant, and he asks him, what should I wear tomorrow? Most important presentation of my life. The accountant says, look, kid, you need to look like you really need the money, so dress like a bum. Torn jeans, old shirt, scuffed up shoes. And the young man is a little confused. He says, boy, that doesn't sound like very good advice. Let me ask my attorney. So he goes to his lawyer and he says, what should I wear for this very important presentation? He says, kid, you got to look like $1 million. Hawk everything you have, buy a Gucci suit, Armani shoes, Ferragamo tie, and look like you don't need the money, and then they'll invest. Now the young man's completely confused. So he goes for a third tie-breaking opinion. He goes to his priest. And he says, Father, I've got this very important presentation tomorrow. What should I wear? My attorney tells me to dress like $1 million. My accountant tells me to dress like a bum. So the priest says, young man, let me tell you a story. Just the other day, this lady came to me on the eve of her wedding night, and she was confused. Her mother had told her to wear a flannel nightgown from neck to toe, and her sister had told her to wear the sexiest negligee she could find. So the young man says, Father, wait a minute. I came to you for advice, and you're telling me stories. What does this have to do with my problem? He says, son, let me tell you what I told her. It doesn't matter what you wear. You're going to get screwed. That's a venture capitalist for you. Any venture capitalists in the crowd? I'm getting ready to duck because they might be throwing stuff at me. Angel capital, the money that comes between startup and venture capital funding, provides what we call seed funding. And typically, angels invest less than $500,000, a few hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're not in the big money. VCs provide later stage growth capital and usually invest in the plus 1 or 2 million. A VC is not really interested if you've got a requirement for $500,000. He'll say, kid, come back when you know how to dress. No, when you've got your business model all sorted out. Typically, angels are first, second round, seed round, maybe, and VCs come later. And angels in the U.S., now just talking about the U.S., invest about as much money per year in startup businesses as venture capitalists do, except that they're 1/14 the size of the investment. In the U.S., we have over 300,000 angels. This is the statistic from the World Bank and the IMF in just 2007. And they invested $26 billion versus $31 billion by VCs. And yet, the skewing was very different in that they invested $1 per investment, whereas an angel was in the $8 million range. In the UK, which is probably the second most entrepreneur-friendly country there is, 5,000 angels exist. Huge difference. And the World Bank statistics says there's only 30 angels in Singapore. And some of my friends tell me that's too many. They're not even that many. So it's really the fact that 30 is an optimistically high number of angels in Singapore is really not the problem. The problem is what causes there to be, what is causing so many restrictions for angels to operate efficiently, effectively, and joyously in this market, even though this is not an emerging market, but it is typical of this entire region. And we'll look at some more information about it. Because institutions matter. The stronger your basic fundamental institutions, the better your financial markets are. And what are these institutions? Rule of law, as I talked about in Russia, we had the efficacy of courts so that you can get redress when laws are broken. Security of contracts. That's what we didn't have in Russia. Property rights. With all of this comes the ability to feed capital to all parts of the economy. The nation's financial system is totally dependent on the strength of its of its basic institutions. So institutions matter. Not only do they matter, but they matter in a way that directly reflects the health of the entire economy. When they work well, entrepreneurs are able to invest. Angels are able to support, venture capitalists come in, and you have a very successful path to wealth and prosperity. When they don't work well, they hold back entrepreneurship, and they prevent them from competing well, not only at home and abroad. Because in the end, unlike multinational corporations, startups rely on local environments. You can't write a contract with a supplier if you're a startup based on UN law out of Geneva that many multinationals can do, or maybe Delaware law, or whatever, wherever they're headquartered. You depend on the institutions of the country and the legal systems of the country that you live in. They matter more to local firms than larger multinational firms, because unlike multinational firms, they are their nation's hope for raising the standard of living. MNCs, they're more interested in raising their own standard of living. It's the small business that helps raise the standard of living of countries. And small firms, startups, can't raise money abroad. So in the end, the institutions that also drive, beyond all of what I talked about, which is the rule of law and efficacy of contracts, is the banking system, the local stock market that provides liquidity and exits for startup entrepreneurs, as well as all the other institutions. These set the rules of the game and allow investors to enter, because the institutions matter as much to the startup as they do to the investor. A lot of words up there, but essentially what it says is that if you've got great economic institutions and you've got great support for entrepreneurial activity, if the ecosystem's right, money has a way of finding its way to the right person. Kind of like that octopus I have there, like all the tentacles spread to the various parts of the economy that is needing this investment capital so that it can double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, dectuple itself. If you look at institutions in the US, they're the strongest of any in the world in terms of supporting entrepreneurial activity, as evidenced by the fact there's 300,000. I guess our young man here has had a late night. You may want to wake him up. Hi there. Late night? So maybe I need to tell you another joke. But in the end, as I said, it didn't happen overnight in the US. It took a long time. Hamilton set up the Federal Reserve. Wall Street, 120 years ago, came into being, the New York Stock Exchange. Liquidity, investment banks, the rule of law have changed over the years, the courts. This didn't happen overnight. Now, things happen much faster in emerging economies when the governments have a will to make the proper changes. But still, it must be remembered that it takes time. And the US is unmatched for its size, for its efficiency in raising capital, even today, after the economic recession, even though it feels awful when you're in the US sometimes. But it's really, when you compare it with the rest of the world, it's still the most efficient spot in the world to raise capital, as evidenced by the fact that a lot of Chinese IPOs and Indian IPOs and Asian IPOs occur on NASDAQ and on the New York Stock Exchange rather than in their own local markets. And it's because of the institutions that have come to be. They may seem invisible to the casual observer from far, but they are and basic and have taken 200 years to form, and that is why they are so stable. It allows people to take, yes. So motivation for angels in the end to invest locally. They need strong institutions. They need timely financial information, quarterly reporting, tax reporting. In fact, most small private companies have to send financial information back to their investors because they have to file tax returns. So even though you may be too busy to do quarterly returns, you will in the end have to send them an annual financial statement. And it's an environment that encourages investing, and angels tend to be far more patient than venture capitalists. That's why I call them vulture capitalists. They will tend to stay with an investment, and they will, of course, expect a return at some point, but the return does not have to be as high as the one that the venture capitalists expect. A VC typically will invest in 10 companies, expect 4 to go bust, 3 to be mediocre, and 3 to give them a 7x return. So that way, over the 10. So in the emerging markets, let's take a look. So it's globalizing, but institutional challenges remain. And one of the problems I think that emerging markets, from my is that the skewing of wealth, where wealth is concentrated in the hands of a few, is one of the major impediments to angel investing. When you're asset rich, and maybe you're a little cash poor, when you have a lot of money in your family and it's family money, there's really no need to take risk. The reason you have 300 to 800,000 angels in the U.S. is you've got a large middle class that is willing to take some risk, make some investments, maybe have emotional connections with some startup founder, and has the liquidity to make these angel investments. Emerging economies have lots of other challenges, including corruption, which probably doesn't exist in Singapore. I don't know Singapore that well, but I have not seen corruption here. And when you look at the size of the parallel economy, that's a direct reflection on the kind of corruption and problems you face in various emerging economies. And both the US and Singapore have very small parallel economies. So to look at them, I thought I would look at 4 ASEAN countries, 4 BRIC countries, and the US as a way of comparing and thinking about what is it that is causing angel investments to happen or not happen in these emerging economies. So I looked at various factors. Cost of starting a business. That's a problem sometimes when it's very expensive to start a business. Hiring and firing costs. What are the laws that prevent you from firing people, or what makes it difficult to hire people? Such as if talent is not available, can you get visas to bring people in? That's maybe a bit of a problem here in Singapore. Firing people is very difficult to fire somebody in Brazil. The extent of financial disclosures required by the local institutions and the laws, and the state of the IPO market, the state of the stock market. Basic data, you look at it, and it's quite startling. Now, this is 2010 information. So if you really readjust it for exchange rate fluctuations, Singapore probably is tied with the US on GNI per capita, around $48,000 per person. At the end of 2010, it was $43,000. But I think the Sing dollar has appreciated another 10% since the end of 2010. The population size, the GDP, this basically sets the background for the further analysis on the environment for angel investing. And if you look at the number of public companies that exist, 15,000 public companies in the United States. Again, a reflection of Rome was not built in the day, institutions matter, and risk-taking is rewarded. That eventually leads to public listing. Cost of starting a business. See, the cost of starting a business in terms of the percentage of gross national income is very high in India. Well, one, because gross national income in India is very low. But you can see Singapore is in a very favorable position here. It's better than the US. And the number of days it takes to start a business, Singapore is very strong. Just a few days to start a business here in Singapore. Even longer in the US. But still very good. Cost of hiring and firing. Once again, Singapore is in excellent state. So a lot of these factors all say this is a great place to start a business. Indonesia is very high. Brazil is the highest. It's very expensive to fire somebody in Brazil. If you look at the ease of starting a business, look at the ranking. Singapore is the easiest place on earth to start a business. This is stats. Number 1 out of 185 countries. The US is 5th. Malaysia is not bad, 21. You look at the BRIC countries, and they're pathetic, and yet they're BRICS. So they're, once again, the story of this, they're succeeding in spite of the government and in spite of them, all of the restrictions. And the size of the parallel economy, Singapore and the US, are low. So that says that there's less corruption and there's strong financial and legal institutions in place. So my observations, like basic institutions, financial markets matter. They underpin everything. And when they work well, it allows capital to be raised and angels to invest. However, if I look at Singapore specifically, all the rankings come out great, except for one, number of angels, only 30. So the question, it's ranked number 1 amongst all nations for ease of starting a business, costs of starting a business, strong laws, but puzzling that only 30 angels exist in such an environment. And there are lots of answers we can talk about. So there are challenges that exist for angels. Institutions in most of these emerging markets are not where they need to be, but they are in Singapore, and I wouldn't call it an emerging economy, so don't get mad at me, please. Some governments are facilitating, and Singapore certainly attempts to, but maybe that's part of the problem. There's too much government money feeding startups, so it's really not a startup environment. And finally, some questions remain, certainly in my mind, because I don't have all the answers. There is definitely a role for angel investment in emerging markets, because that's what fuels the growth. However, is it just a way in some of these markets to enrich a few people? The wealthy. The wealth is getting more and more skewed. And why has there been so little angel investing? I mean, I've given you lots of my opinions. I don't have the absolute answer. And maybe some of you can provide that absolute answer to me. But why is there so little angel investing going on in these emerging markets? That's the puzzling question. So, angel investing, how many of you are angels here in this would consider? There's an angel. You're not Singaporean.
No.
So.
Well, I'm Singaporean.
Okay. You're investing in Singapore? Yes. As an angel? Yes. Okay, that's 1 out of how many? Wow. You're 2 out of the 30. We have 7% of the entire angel community in this room. Well, it's been my pleasure to be here in front of you today. Look forward to taking some of your questions. Thank you all very much. I have a little section on my journey, or the lessons learned, but we can address that during Q&A because I think I've overrun my time. And thank you all very much.
Ashok says there's 30 in Singapore, and there's at least about 5 over here. And if you want to see more, we have more in our Entrepreneurs Corner event, which happens every Wednesday of the month at 6:30. Yeah? That's a platform for entrepreneurs to pitch for about 3 minutes to gain the interest of the investors. We have at least about 10 or 15 of them during the event. So do join us every first Wednesday of the month at 6:30. Okay? Right. Our next speaker. Oh yeah, before I proceed, for those who just walked in, a very good evening to you and thank you for joining us. Okay? Our second speaker is Mr. Anil Kathod, who will be sharing with us on sustainable energy, fueling for our future. Anil Kathod is the Managing Director of Argonaut Private Equity, a global venture and private equity firm with $5.5 billion in assets under his management. Argonaut has significant investments in sustainable energy space, including in solar thermal, wind, biomass, natural gas, fuel cell, advanced insulation materials, and solid-state lighting companies. Anil is also the founding partner of the firm's investment practice in India, where he built a local company, developed investment strategy, and has invested more than $600 million in infrastructure, clean tech technology, retail, financial services, and consumer goods companies. In addition to India, Anil has also actively invested in technology, clean tech, and medical, as I mentioned earlier, in US and in Israel. Anil currently serves on the boards of 12 companies, including Memjet Technologies, OmniGuide, Bombay Stock Exchange, Ciclu Networks, Venture East, and Crown Bio in US, India, China, Ireland, and Australia. Anil also serves on the global board of TIE and was formerly president of TIE Atlanta. It is now my pleasure to invite Mr. Anil Kathod on stage. Anil, please.
Well, thank you, Leila. And what a wonderful job of analyzing angel investing. And I can assure you, all VCs are not vulture capitalists. Some of us really do play a very significant role in promoting the cause of entrepreneurs. The topic today I have is a very broad and big topic, sustainable energy, fueling our future. And I've to try to do this thing in 30 minutes. It's going to be a tall order, and I'll do my best. I do want to make it very interactive because I expect a lot of questions. This is a very broad topic. Although energy accounts for about 13 to 15% of global GDP, it actually underpins almost every facet of our life, from the conveniences of our day-to-day life to economic production across the board, from whichever industry, whichever government sector, wherever we come from. Energy underpins the growth in our society. Now, sustainable energy has become very important aspect. I'll talk for a variety of reasons, but just to put these things in perspective, about 8% of global energy capacity today is sustainable energy. But more importantly, 34% of last year's energy production, all the new energy production, 34% came from sustainable energy. So you can see the growth trajectory for sustainable energy. $9 billion were invested last year in R&D associated with sustainable energy, and $211 billion were invested in sustainable energy infrastructure, a 32% increase. So it's no longer a startup industry. There's a serious dollar, serious commitment from governments, from investors, and from entrepreneurs. Now, some of you may like this global warming scenario, as the size of our clothing have come down over the century as a result of global warming. But let me assure you, global warming is a very serious issue facing us. Everything from receding Arctic snow, from melting glaciers, and increasing severity of the tsunamis and storms. There are a lot of data one can put together on the global warming scenarios, but I thought the pictures really tell the story. So this issue is very serious and needs to be dealt with. But before I go into much in sustainable energy, I thought it would be a good idea for me to tell you just tiny little bit about Argonaut Private Equity. We are a global private equity and venture capital fund, as I was introduced earlier. Our investment focus is global. While vast majority of our investments are in the US, about two-thirds, about a third of our investments are scattered in several countries. And we have fairly large, fairly wide discretion in size of investments we make, just from a few $1 million to multi-$100 million. And about 10% of our investments Seems like we have a... We have a problem with the fonts here. But in any event, about 10% of our investments are made in wide variety of sustainable energy spaces, from solar to wind to biomass, solid state lighting, and some of these areas I'll cover in the next few minutes. The story which I want to tell you today essentially will cover 5 key topics. We are sitting at the crossroad of growth, our growth requirement and environment, which kind of brings us to a tipping point for sustainable energy. This is what's driving the investment in sustainable energy. Innovation within sustainable energy, there are a number of new technologies which have come. Unfortunately, there are no silver bullets which can just replace oil and coal and fossil fuels. So there are a number of new innovations, and a lot more needs to happen. There is a lot of availability of capital. We've talked about $200 billion got invested just last year. And I want to talk a little bit about our own investments in this space. By 2050, we expect 2030, the global population to be about 8 billion people. That's about 3 times the size of the population we had just about 50 years ago. That next few years, the global GDP to be about 20 times what it is now, which is a wonderful news that it will lift the lives in a lot of people in Asia, emerging markets, and so on. But unfortunately, it also will drive the need for energy by about 6 times. Just imagine the environmental impact which we are seeing now. If energy was to go up for another 6 times, what would be the impact? Today, 1.4 billion people don't have access to electricity. Imagine the time when they all will drive cars. There are nearly about 1 billion cars today on the roads, and with continuous addition of these cars, the global warming scenario gets much worse. So as a result of the global warming scenario, as a result for need for continued energy, we are finally reaching at a tipping point where countries are beginning to be concerned. Prices of coal have gone up 5x since 2005. We depend on very unreliable regimes, hostile regimes for oil security. And as a result, the energy security, rising population, the aspirations of people are all driving us towards sustainable energy. But as I mentioned, there are no silver bullets. There are a number of new solutions which are coming out, but vast majority of them are hard to build in commercial scale or large scale. Here's a list of number of sustainable energy ideas, innovations which are going on. Starting with the solar, significant investment has gone. Everyone is looking of harnessing the power of sun. But we are looking at about by 2015 achieving the grid parity of about 10 to 12 cents per hour kilowatt pricing. Wind, which is the largest source of sustainable energy today, roughly accounting about 2% of the global energy. On onshore, wind has reached the grid parity. That means the price is very comparable to fossil fuels, coal-generated power. The problem with wind is often in a place where there is no connectivity with the grid. Wind is often in a place which are not populated, and energy is needed in the populated places. So transporting energy from where the wind is to where it needs to be has been a difficult prospect, and that's the reason why wind has not continuous completely dominated the energy space. Electric vehicles, there's a lot of, this 2011 particularly has been is a milestone with the introduction of cars like Volt, Chevy Volt, and Nissan Leaf, which are totally radically new technologies which have come into the market. So we are beginning to see a massive change in development and investments in electrical vehicles. Bioenergy, which has become pretty sizable area in terms of about 5% of the US fuel today comes from ethanol. Of course, the problem with ethanol is any particularly corn-based ethanol is it competes directly with our food supply. And when it competes directly with our food supply, we have seen the prices of corn, which have gone from about $2, $3 per bushel to $7 or $8 per bushel, making it very, very difficult for many of the people on the earth to get sufficient food. LED and solid state lighting is another major new areas. Incandescent light, which is about 5% efficient. In the US, by 2012, 100-watt bulb is going to be phased out in favor of new LED-based lighting, which is nearly 20 times more efficient compared to standard lighting. And the amount of savings associated with LED, which is a cool generating lighting, is about $150 billion saving globally once it's completely turned over. Smart grid and storage. Historically, our grid is very antiquated. Being able to carry energy from one part of the area to where the generation is to the distribution plant is one of the most inefficient. We've seen the major power outage even in the countries like the United States, blacking out entire New York City, and the risk associated with current grid from terrorism and massive energy demands could be significant. And there's much work, much investment is going on in smart grid technologies. Everything from cement to insulation material. Construction is one of the most inefficient areas, uses enormous energy. So there's much work is going on in the new materials, and many other technologies such as fuel cell, geothermal, and many other areas are growing in rapid progression. Investing in this space naturally is very tricky because many of these technologies are still in relatively early stages and investment heavy, very capital intensive. Our criteria in this space in investing is we look to invest in companies or technologies which have relevant scale that can be scaled up significantly, and the solution is really significant. They're material solution and not simple or easy to replicate solutions. We look for solutions which are very manageable in terms of delivery time. There are a lot of technology labs which would like to continue on innovating for decades to come. Ultimately, for us to generate a return on our investment, we look for something which can actually generate in a reasonable period of time. We look for many of these technologies today depend on heavy subsidies from the government. But ultimately, as we are seeing the economic difficulties running the European Union and the United States, these subsidies will begin to come down dramatically. So we look for investments or the technologies which actually can stand on its own feet within 5-7 year period, as opposed to continuously depend on. And finally, we look for the cost trajectory which is declining over a period of time, so these technologies can be very competitive to fossil fuels. And naturally, we are not alone. There's a lot of investments which are going on, as I mentioned earlier. There were $211 billion were invested last year in sustainable technology, nearly 6 times growth over the 6-year period. So many investors are finding enormous opportunity. In fact, last year there were about 34 IPOs were done in sustainable energy, totaling about $40 billion. There were a number of new M&A transactions which happened, totaling more than $10 billion. So this has come in mainstream. And by the way, about 40% of these IPOs actually happened in Asia. So Asia is now driving every place from China to India is enormous growth in sustainable energy. What is very interesting that while there is enormous R&D money going in various technologies, solar and wind, which has already achieved a level of maturity, continue to get vast majority of the money. If you look at of the investments made, 47% of the investments were made in the wind space, and more than 40% in the solar space. And vast majority of these investments have gone in putting together utility scale in countries like China, India, Germany, and the United States. A little bit about various technologies and where they actually stand. As we were talking about solar, just looking at the chart on the left, there are 3 lines coming down. The cost of solar technologies is dropping pretty rapidly. As a matter of fact, today, a solar panel costs about $1.25 per watt. That's 60% reduction over last 2 years. And today, a complete solar plant can be put together somewhere around $2.50 to $3 per watt. To put things in perspective, a coal-fired thermal plant costs about $1 to $1.25 per kilowatt. Now, solar still seems pretty high at $2.50 to $3 per watt. It has come down from $6 to $8 per watt just 2 or 3 years ago. So it's coming down very rapidly, and unlike thermal coal-fired plants, it doesn't require the same raw material, which continuously going in price. So if you look at conventional energy, which is largely coal-fired plants, the cost trajectory on those are going up, while cost for solar is coming down. And as a result, the penetration of solar technology is growing rapidly. And today, the photovoltaic market is about 18 gigawatt. It's expected to grow about 40 gigawatt annually over the next 3 or 4 years as the prices come down. We have a very exciting investment in this space in a company called Solyndra, which is using thin film SiC-based solar technology, very, very different cylindrical solar panels. Essentially brings the light not just from the top but also from the bottom, so it's able to generate energy at much faster pace. Last year, President Obama came up and we got $535 million in solar grant for the company, and it is hailed as one of the most innovative solar technology companies in the world. And similarly, we have a solar thermal investment also in the United States, which essentially takes molten salts, brings up the water from 2050 degrees and runs the turbines from that hot water to generate utility scale power. And like Solyndra, we received $735 million in federal grant to build a 110 megawatt power plant in Nevada. So there is a lot, just like many other governments, US government is doing a lot in the space. Similarly, We have investments in wind technology. Wind is one of the largest and built up infrastructure. About 2% of the global energy comes today from wind. And wind has tremendous potential if one can harness the problem. I briefly touch base, and I'm running out of time, but briefly touch base that there's a lot going on in electrical cars and the hybrid cars. In fact, today about 3 million cars around the globe are hybrid or electric cars. It's expected just the United States alone over the next 20 years will have a third of the cars on the road to be hybrid or electric. Bioenergy, there's enormous investments going on. People are beginning to finally realize that food safety is equally important as energy safety for the world. And therefore, there is a lot going on from converting waste and biomass to power. And there continues to be a number of new technologies in this space where the investment is going. This is an area which requires a lot of scale over the next 5 years to 5 to 10 years. We'll see enormous growth in this. And as you can see, if in fact we are able to produce bioenergy for about $1 to $1.50 per liter range, you'll see enormous growth take off in this space. LED and solid state lighting is one of the fastest growing areas, very clearly because of the size of market opportunity. Actually, electricity or the lighting is about $70 to $80 billion size market. It's a large replacement market opportunity, and therefore enormous amount of work is going on. We have two companies in the space, a company called Luminous Technology and a company called LED Innovation, which are building both LED technology itself, LED semiconductor chips, as well as LED light bulbs. Finally, we have two very interesting investments, what I call micro investments. In India, an experiment where we actually are building solar lanterns and solar fans for small villages where people who don't have any access to grid or any access to lighting. And this little company is providing tens of thousands of people lighting where they don't have any other access. And similarly, we have another company which is providing very low-cost access to financial services through an ATM network, which is put together with solar energy. So idea is to really put solar-based application or sustainable-based applications to work. As I mentioned, this is a very broad topic to cover in a relatively short window of time. But to summarize this, we actually have reached at a tipping point for energy in order for us to be able to maintain sanctity of our environment, as well as continue to grow in prosperity. We have to continue to invest in this. Fossil fuels such as coal and oil will remain viable. In 2030, we'll still be using because there's no other meaningful solution which can substitute them. However, if we can cap the growth of these fossil fuels via proper investment and growth in sustainable energy, we can begin to save our environment and provide enormous opportunity for entrepreneurs everywhere. There are many sustainable energy technologies. I think it's, again, it's worth, for those of you who are interested, it's worth an area of looking into, because over the next decade or two, literally brand new industries will emerge out of this. Hundreds of billions of dollars of new wealth will be created through sustainable energy. There are going to be many more IPOs coming up over the next 5 to 10 years in this space. And therefore, this is an opportunity for both investors as well as entrepreneurs too. And finally, governments, corporate, and investors are beginning to focus. In fact, 119 countries around the globe already have established policies and standards for sustainable energy. So I think the realization is now very serious for everyone in the space. Thank you.
Thank you, Anil and Ashok, for such an insightful session. We would now like to invite Ashok to join Anil on stage for the Q&A session. And as I mentioned before, for those who just walked in, we are making the Q&A session a little bit more interactive. So if you have a smartphone with you, you can actually go to live, as in LIVE, .pigeonhole, as in the pigeon, the bird pigeon, hole.sg, and just add the password DSS2011. If you're shy to come on questions during this session, you can just post your questions in there.
Yeah, but I'd rather you come to the microphone, look me in the eye, and know who I'm talking to.
Okay. Now, today we also have the privilege here of having a moderator for the Q&A session. He is Mr. Ravi Manta. Just let me introduce you to him. Ravi is the Vice Chairman of TIE Singapore and is a Portfolio Manager for Global Equities in Fidelity Investments, the nation's largest mutual fund company and a leading provider of financial services. He is a member of the Select Global team, responsible for managing over $17 billion in assets on behalf of the institutional clients worldwide. Ravi is also portfolio manager for the Select Emerging Market Strategy. Ravi has 15 years of investment experience, having been a portfolio manager and analyst at investment firms in Seattle and London. He is a chartered financial analyst and a member of the Boston Securities Analyst Society. He's active as a charter member, TIE in Boston, and chaired TIE Con S2008. He's also active in the American Indian Foundation, AIF. I would like to invite now Mr. Ravi to join us at the stage, please. Okay, how are we going to do this? For those, the traditional way of Q&A, what you can do is just raise your hand, and upon selected by Ravi, you can just come onto the aisle mic and just post your questions. Okay, Ravi, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laila. My CV is only slightly out of date. About 2 weeks ago, I retired from Fidelity Investment. I've actually just moved to Singapore, and I'm looking forward to working with SMU. Also working with the Thai Singapore chapter. Just want to acknowledge our chairman, Thai Singapore, Karan Singh Thakral, who's here in the audience today, and just looking forward to spending more time with folks in this room, both in group settings, but also hopefully I'll meet a lot of you one-on-one going forward. Thank you very much. I just want to kick off the session. We have two very distinguished guests here today, both from the U.S. What I'm going to do is I'll just take questions from you guys. Maybe what we can do is we'll just alternate between the two distinguished guests we have. My first question to start off the evening would be for Ashok. What really struck me, Ashok, at the beginning of your presentation was the
jokes.
The jokes, of course, are irreplaceable, but the when you put up a slide that said that there is something called the risk gene that afflicts only about 3% of us. Risk I always thought was more of a continuum. Some people love racing Formula One cars and going on roller coasters, and I'm terrified of both of those things. But in a more controlled setting, I think a lot of us are capable of taking more risks than we think we are. Consider the fact that most entrepreneurial activities sort of happen in your 30s and 40s. A lot of people who start businesses tend to be experienced folks who have worked in corporations, etc., and have started businesses sort of a bit later on in life. Would you actually say that we can teach risk-taking to individuals, and if so, how would we set about doing that?
No, or maybe. I think you are probably talking more about risk in terms of the highs you get from bungee jumping or racing cars, which is a totally different kind of risk, Gene, than gambling your children's college fund on making payroll this Friday. That's a totally different risk. And I think that is what is randomly distributed. The reason that entrepreneurs tend to be a little more successful, other than the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Bill Gates, and they're the exception that prove the rule, they tend to be more successful later on is because they have, one, had experience. They've gone to the school of bloody noses, as I call it. You get your nose bloodied, you know the mistake, not to run into that wall again. They have developed a network of contacts which help a lot in terms of raising money, in terms of getting customers, in terms of getting advice and mentoring. And they have also developed business practices by watching others, those who do it well and those who do it poorly. So if you're a somewhat smart person, who most entrepreneurs think they are, they all think they shape Superman, as I said, they tend to pick up on that. So you have a better chance of being successful if you wait a little bit. When people come to me with the point that, hey, I'd like to start my own business right out of school, my advice typically to them is, unless you've got the next Facebook, go work for a medium-sized company, maybe not a large company because you might get pigeonholed. Go work for a medium-sized or small company, learn the ropes, develop a network, get some contacts, and then go out on your own. So I think it's very hard to teach the ability to take risk. It's easier to develop a method for innovation, as Google and Apple have proven. I mean, innovation is not that spark, the spontaneous eruption of genius. It can be developed, though it could be that spontaneous eruption. So I think there's a difference between the innovation gene, which is really not a gene, and the risk gene, which is a true gene, or a virus. The gene is the wrong word for you, botany and biology people. It's not.
Thank you, Ashok. So we've seen that Argonaut has made some tremendous investments in sustainable energy. The question I always have, when I was managing money at Fidelity, one of the key adages that I subscribed to was, you talk solar, but you buy coal. To what extent do you think the amount of investment that's going on in sustainable energy now is really a function of the $100+ oil? I mean, what if oil went back down to $50? How much of this would be sustainable?
There's no question. There's no question that investment in sustainable energy, to the magnitude it has, it's a function of fossil fuels, whether it's coal or whether it's oil, going tremendously. We all tend to know the price of oil because it's widely published. We don't necessarily monitor coal, which also has gone up, at least in the similar ratio during this period. What are the likelihood of coal or oil to go down to $30 or $40 or $50? The likelihood of them going down is about equal to 97% people acquiring entrepreneurial gene. So I think we are sustainable energy is here, truly to stay. The demand will continue to grow. I didn't show some of the charts, which also show, by the way, depleting oil reserves for the easy find oil. So the new oil which is being found is more expensive to get to, And therefore, I think we are, this issue is here to stay, and we are seeing the cost curve for sustainable energy to continue to come down. So I think there is an equilibrium. So, by the way, having said that, I also want to, for the record, we have substantial investments in fossil fuels. We do have multi-billion-dollar investments in oil and conventional energy, thermal power. We begin to move to sustainable energy because we do see this as the future.
I have one question now for Ashok before I'll take some from the audience. Ashok, one of the things that seems kind of a real key ingredient for entrepreneurship is what is the price of failure? You know, if you have certain countries like Japan where the stigma of bankruptcy is so profound. You have other countries, where I've recently heard of stories where in some countries you can get government funding, but it comes with strings such as unlimited liability, personal liability.
At Singapore.
Well, Singapore, I think there is some funding here that may have strings like that. In the U.S., it's almost like a badge of honor. Would you talk about that?
Well, I think on one of my charts I had one of the key ingredients for an entrepreneur is the willingness to fail. You cannot really succeed if you're not prepared to fail. I think that's one of the reasons maybe why, and I don't know Japan very well, it wasn't an emerging market, but I think entrepreneurs are not embraced in Japan as much as they are in the United States. So I think you cannot truly be an entrepreneur. You could be, as we used to call it in the Young Entrepreneur Organization, which is YEO, which is now EO. The tagline was, "We are young entrepreneurs, lucky sperm not invited." So if you inherit a business, entrepreneur who's those oftentimes is characterized as such. So lucky sperm not permitted. You have to be permitted. You have to be prepared to fail on your own, time and time again, to be successful eventually. Some get successful on the first try, like a Bill Gates. Some it takes them a while.
Actually, we only hear about the people who've been successful. There are so many stories.
Yeah, but the key is you pick yourself off the mat and you go again.
Yes, absolutely.
Love to take some questions from the audience. Would you please introduce yourself and also say who you'd like the question to be answered by? Thank you very much. Please.
Good evening. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is David. I open a company here in Singapore. Yes, it is very fast. We actually launched what we think is the first conference on storing energy. So it was very interesting to see these attendees coming and talking about storing energy. I have two questions. Actually, before I ask the questions, we are recruiting, so anyone here who wants to apply, please see me later. Thank you very much. Okay, so I am very excited to know that electric vehicle has got a growth, and we also do a conference on that. We do them abroad in China and Europe. I get often asked, how come in Singapore you don't have a value chain for electric vehicles when there is a very good environment for it? So I wonder if you could help me with the answer to that, perhaps. And also a question for Ashok. Do you have a checklist when you do your investments, or how often do you go by gut feelings? Because obviously being an entrepreneur, you also need to have gut feelings. So I wonder if you have some experiences to share. Thank you.
Who do you want to go first? Go, Anil.
Well, just on the energy storage, energy storage is still very early stage of growing. We are moving from molten salts to lithium ion is now beginning to come in the mainstream, and there are still the very few places in the world, United States being and the China being the two. These are the two countries where because energy storage has required such massive investment, as you probably realize. This is one of the very capital-intensive areas. Companies like A123, which is building utility scale power plants, have raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And I think that's what limits energy storage. I see so many deals come to us on energy storage, but many of them lack credibility to be able to do storage cost effectively. I think that's going to beginning to change with the advances in lithium ion. Which particular technology? What are exactly your?
He was talking about electric cars in Singapore.
Just say electric cars.
Two events, one which is on grid integrated energy storage,
Yes.
Where during the conference we have compressed air energy storage, lithium ion, flywheels,
And metal air.
yeah, not as much. Maybe we should. Yeah, and then we do one which is on electric vehicles. I mean, my question was also on electric vehicles, whether you have an insight about what is stopping us from making the electric vehicle value chain
Well,
successful.
let me give you
in
my
Singapore.
observation on that. I think it's
Okay.
because buying a car in this country is so damned expensive.
Yeah, it's hard to answer in context of Singapore, but China, there is enormous investments are going on, and enormous progress being made on electric car, the storage for battery storage for electric cars, and I think this is going to be a pretty important year for electric car battery technology, primarily coming out of China for companies like BYD and others.
So I guess you believe in it. And
Absolutely.
do you think it will take over the normal engine car?
It may not take over a normal engine car, but because hybrids will kind of coexist for a long time, and even by 2030, we only anticipate about a third of the cars would be. But that's a massive market. When you look at the worldwide, China will have about 18 million cars worldwide, annually. U.S. have about 14 million cars. India will have about 16 million cars. So if you have a third of those cars, that's a massive, massive market opportunity. And if you're successful, I think that's a great opportunity for you coming down. I really believe this is going to be a very successful area in coming period.
Okay.
And there was a second part of that.
Oh, yes, it was. Yeah, my track record with angel investments is pretty abysmal. My track record with my own companies is a lot better. And the reason is I go with the gut. I have a hard time turning down an impassioned plea from a young entrepreneur who wants to take a shot at it. So you go with your gut. You shouldn't. You should be intellectually ruthless, but it's difficult. And sometimes you are prepared to fail with the young man or young woman who wants to succeed. So, a lot of angels do go with gut.
I have been on the receiving end of venture capital or angel funding twice in my life. I've been an angel investor and now a professional investor. Ultimately, although the vast majority of the angels do go by gut, I think increasingly, especially in the US, the more sophisticated angels are beginning to get to a reasonable template. Is still based on the gut, but there is a more disciplined approach which prevails.
Thank you very much.
It took guts to believe in the Wright brothers.
Yeah.
So in the end, the gut does matter.
Right.
Gut, ultimately, even for professional investors,
Okay.
gut matters.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to take a question actually from the crowdsourcing. Just to give you both an introduction to this pigeonhole, I'm just finding out the wonders of it myself. What we have behind are a bunch of questions being asked by the audience, and then the rest of the audience seems to be voting on the question. So the most popular one is the one on the top left, which I'm going to read out to both of you, so please answer that one. As an entrepreneur, what should I look out for in an angel investor? How do I separate those who will truly help my business versus someone who's just trying to make a quick buck and is no different from a VC, vulture investor, vulture capitalist, I presume, or a venture capitalist?
Well, if you are in the luxurious position of looking at multiple angels who want to invest in your company, great. Take it from all of them. And then sort them out later. Because, frankly, that's a position that's very rare. But mostly angels tend to have the best interests of the entrepreneur at heart. They come with more than just hard capital. I called it soft capital, which is mentoring, helping with their network contacts, and even sometimes with leads. The motivation is usually good. If there is this vulture-style angel, they probably will not be an angel and will be investing their own money. They'll probably be putting their money in a fund that'll be run by a vulture. So, but God go with you if you've got multiple people trying to invest in your company. Great. Send them to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with Ashok. Vast majority of the entrepreneurs don't have the luxury of having multiple choices. So you take money you need as soon as you possibly can, so you can get going on your innovation or your entrepreneurial path.
So we'll take the second one before I turn back to the audience for a live question. What is the line between insanity in continuing a venture and having courage in your idea, even when people are telling you it can't work and things aren't going right?
The line is very blurred. Most entrepreneurs are a little bit insane, a little bit nuts, but I would go with the idea till it dies, if it dies, because you never know when it might get a chance at life. So again, be prepared to fail. Go with it, and I don't think there's anything insane about believing in your idea. Might be a bad idea, but the market will tell you that, and the investor will tell you that. But you need to believe in it.
It's the toughest thing an entrepreneur faces. There are always three outcomes, and vast majority of them, outcome is in the middle. The one outcome, which is company is insanely successful, like Facebook or something like that, it's very clear. Other times, it's a clear failure, and that's also very clear. The biggest problem entrepreneurs face when they are living dead, sitting in the middle. And I think that's where it does require, we all come across many people forever working a company and not making a living. So I think that's where the sanity somewhere has to sometime prevail, which, as Ashok is saying, entrepreneurs don't always have.
No, keep going for it. There's a venture capitalist talking here.
We have to pull the plug when we feel
and
it.
They do, with delight.
And we do. Not with delight, but yeah, we do. We do.
Laughing and grinning as they step on your throat.
So happy to take a live question.
With our money going down the tube with it.
Good evening. My name is Jem. I'm from Desperate. It's my own company I just set up. And I'm pleased to have two of your gentlemen here. I appreciate that Mr. Rao gave a lot of idea, and then Mr. Anil gave a lot of innovation about energy. My question is, when two of your gentlemen the product, or you look at the team, or you look at the system, what are you looking at first? This is my question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Three.
All of the above.
So which one you look at first? I mean,
the team.
Most important, the team. But what if the product is not?
In fact, it goes back to when I first was out there trying to shake some trees to get some investment 20 years ago in a company that I was going to the next stage with. And he says, look, this was an investor who eventually invested. He said, there are 5 things I look for. Number 5 is product. Number 4 is market. Number 3 is team. Number 2 is team. Number 1 is team.
Thank you very much.
We have a very fundamental belief, a team which is A class,
Yep.
can deliver the B class business plan. A B class team cannot deliver an A class business plan. So team is the most important thing. The person behind is the most important thing.
Okay, thank you. But what if I have a not very good team, but I have a very good product? So will you help to grow the business and then grow?
Well, that's where angels and mentors come in handy. They can bring people to you that you might not normally have access to.
Okay, can I talk to you later?
Always.
Thank you very much.
And your government visas.
Thank you.
I think you should be a bit careful, because what you may end up with is a VC will come in and take your product and then get a new team in place.
One important advice to you, because most entrepreneurs are also very stubborn. They don't necessarily look for talented people where they are actually they're short. No, but that's what I'm saying.
Great.
You have to make sure that you the good thing you're looking. Many people don't look for. Many entrepreneurs don't look. They don't identify their own weakness.
I'm going to take a question from the crowd up there. I think the U.S. is on people's mind. Which U.S. presidential candidate do you think is pro-business?
Wow. You're asking the wrong guy. I'm a flaming lefty, so.
I think we sit at a different side of the political spectrum.
Yes. Well, I'm sitting to the left, he's sitting to the right.
Right.
Very appropriate.
Would you comment on the U.S. side?
No, I fundamentally believe that it is naturally, as the leader of the free world, the United States does have an obligation to establish a set of framework which is business friendly, which is fundamentally holds the values of capitalism.
So you're not answering. Would you take Obama or Palin?
Yeah, I put them both in the equal footing. No, and therefore
he's being a politician. Go on.
Therefore, I won't pick
Obama
either.
or Michelle Bachmann. Obama or Mitt Romney. Go on.
So I'll go on the limb, and definitely I'll pick Mitt Romney. I have enormous respect for what Mitt has accomplished, both as a governor as well as a business person, what he has done with Bain.
I think the sensible thing is to wait until after the election.
Yeah.
Before committing yourself. Any more from the audience? We have about 5 minutes. Please.
Anil, thank you very much for coming. I'm sorry I missed the session. I was at the airport. Just wanting to know what would be your perspective with regard to Vinod Khosla's the perspective vis-a-vis yours in terms of the energy perspective and reflection of what's going on and what you intend to do. Either you complement with him or you compete with him. Thanks a lot.
Well, Vinod is a good friend. I've known him for a long time, much before he started investing in energy space. He's one of the early pioneers. He recognizes technologies early, the same way as he recognized the telecom, particularly in optical space and IP space very early on, with investments in companies like Juniper and Seren Networks and so on. He has done an enormous job of building, and he has done a lot of giving it a platform at global level. So a lot of respect for him. We don't compete with him. This space has enormous opportunity for all of us. We have a lot of similar investments. We may have even 1 or 2 common investments with him on sustainable energy. So enormous respect, a true visionary, one of the early has identified the space early. We have the similar views.
There is one from the crowd. The question is, do you think or don't you think it's difficult to find good quality startups in Singapore? If I may translate that just a little bit, or embellish that, I think the real issue is, what can we in Singapore do to infuse more of the Silicon Valley magic? I think that might be a broader question that's more relevant, because I do think that there are plenty of good quality startups in Singapore from the little time that I've spent here. So I think it's more a question of, from the US perspective, how do we export that Silicon Valley magic to places like Singapore, which have all the ingredients, and the two massive markets, India, China, so close to our shores here. How do we recreate that magic here?
Who are you asking the question? Okay. Well, that was the premise of my entire treatise over there, as to how do you encourage angel investing, how do you encourage more startups. I think the problem with Singapore is also part of its wonderful solution, which is it's a small country, wealthy country, strong government, massive investment, massive stimulus provided by the government, with very strong controls in place, which turns off risk-taking entrepreneurs. They'd rather go somewhere else. I think, and I see some Singaporeans in the crowd nodding, I think the short-term option that the government should take, and I don't know if it will or not, is to open up the visas for people who will start businesses in Singapore and bring investment dollars into Singapore. Not that the country needs it, but they need the talent. They need the risk gene to be coming in more, and they need also some of that entrepreneurial activity. So I think that's a short-term thing they could do. Everything else is long-term. Like I said about the US, it took 200 years to build institutions and that magic. That's my view.
I agree. And by the way, in US also, it's many major cities struggle in trying to create the same culture as in Boston or in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, but the thing in the US, though, Anil, is that you...
I agree with you. But many other cities try to see if they can foster and create the same environment of inside the city, and that's difficult. But US has many other things going.
Yeah, so whoever is connected to the government, go knock on their door and tell them to open up the visas.
If I may, Ashok, I had the privilege of listening to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew last week, and he completely agrees with you. He shares exactly what you said, and I do think that the government does get it on the visa front. In fact, I was astonished.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm getting my employment pass. I'm picking it up tomorrow morning, so I can assure you the process has been flawless in all the different countries that I've lived in. So I do think that they get it on the visa front.
Good news.
Any more questions from the audience? We probably can take one or two more questions. We have maybe 1 or 2 minutes left.
I'll probably comment on the G part because I work with the government. So essentially we have a $50 million fund, which is called an Entrepreneurs Fund. And that's basically to bring entrepreneurs, experienced entrepreneurs. So there is basically some sort of sensitivity now in Singapore with respect to foreign talent. And the government is mindful of that. But the government also has said is that there's a role for experienced entrepreneurs to play in Singapore. And so we do bring established entrepreneurs with established track records and not just invite them here, but then infuse capital up to $2 million.
I've got a crazy thought. Let's start chewing gum. And that's a risky thing to do, right?
And I actually beg to differ on the point that there are not good startups. Actually, there are 700 startups in Singapore. And there's a lot of youngsters in Singapore who are very hungry to start a company. What basically they're looking for is people like you to come and mentor them. And so the mentorship element is what is going to make difference. And that's where I guess we're looking for people from US, India, Thai, China to come forward here.
Good point.
Excellent point.
Can I comment something on your Alan? The problem is that the entrepreneur fund that you have are running by bureaucrats. That's going to be a big problem.
That's well put, yes.
Actually,
Entrepreneur to help the government to run that $50 million fund. Then you see the entrepreneur grows.
Actually, there is a crowdsourcing question right here for our two distinguished guests. How can governments and international organizations partner with angel capital in a way that does not crowd out private capital or disincentivize risk-taking? I think maybe we can finish on that note, on that last question.
They can't. Government should get the hell out of the way and allow private capital to do its thing. Government does its thing. And I think it does it brilliantly in this country, but it sure gets in the way. Same thing in India. I mean, they're in the way. They should just get the hell out of the way and allow the entrepreneurial gene to absolutely flourish with the help of private capital. And government capital, where I'm unequivocally on the side of the government getting out of the way.
I think I agree with number one with Ashok. SBA funding model for venture cap VC has worked reasonably well in the US, where actually funding is made available to angels or professional investors without government interference at all. So when government doesn't have any interference in policy making and it's run, only capital is made available, then it can possibly work.
We've got one last question. Ladies up there.
I'd just like to share an experience because I've got a small startup fund from the government, and what happened was we had a team of mentors that had never started their own business before. So it was kind of difficult to relate to them because, you know, being crazy and everything. And they were talking about proof of concepts and, you know, asking us to have like maybe a few letters of people who will buy our product even before we have the money to build the product. So that kind of stuff. Anyways, on a separate note, I think one thing that all of you agree on, or all of us agree on, is an A-team, right? So what does an A-team look like to you? I mean, from your experiences and... Yeah. Thank you.
You know them when you see them. Yeah, it's obviously smart, hardworking, committed, loyal. I also throw in nice. You don't want assholes working in the... and you know, the ability to think in an agile and out-of-the-box fashion. It's all cliches, but they work.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay.
And when you see them, you know them.
Yeah.
Okay.
The innate passion to throw on the top, I think it's absolutely perfect definition.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Yeah, we can keep going.
Sorry to take the last piece. My name is Bill Liu. I'm from Stream Global. We are a venture catalyst, not a capitalist. I want to maybe do justice to the government who is supporting the efforts to encourage entrepreneurship and innovation. We are part of a scheme called Technopreneur Incubation Scheme. And this is a National Research Foundation funded scheme where 7 incubators were appointed. Pleased to say that we are one of the only local companies that was appointed. Basically, the government supports any initiative that we or rather companies that we identify and we are willing to support. And they put in the capital as a bond, and we, the incubator, will put in 15%. And that 85% is up to $500,000 Singapore dollars. So we have some skin as the incubator. We have to put in something like 90,000. Now this bond can be bought back by the incubator within 3 or 4 years, all right? But if it isn't, then it's converted into equity into the company. So the government is actually taking a risk because if the venture or the company doesn't fly.
Yeah, we're aware of that.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I want to make the point is that you know, there are schemes where the government will get out of the way because they don't take part in the decision making, and it's left up to the incubator like ourselves to decide. And the important thing is mentoring the startup and the entrepreneurs. So just want to, say that there are experiments like this, and hopefully it will help the local startup scene. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Leila to wrap up the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ashok, Anil, and Ravi. We would like to present them with a little token of appreciation for the insightful session that we have. Let's give them a round of applause before we give them the token. And to give away the token, we have our own SMU IIE Investor in Residence, Mr. Jayesh Parak. Can I have Jay please on the stage? Thank you, Jay. We will start off with Ashok first, yeah, in sequence. Okay.
Yes, Ashok. Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks so much for coming
Okay,
back.
thank you.
You'll just take a photo.
It's today's
Jay, take a
from
photo.
today. It's great.
Okay.
Gotta look at him.
Okay, next we have Anil.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jay.
Here we go. Look here.
Thank you.
Very, very clever.
And of course, not forgetting our guest moderator, Ravi.
Thanks a lot.
We will just take a quick group shot. Yeah?
Group shot.
Yeah.
Group shot.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's session. We would like to invite you for a buffet dinner just outside the auditorium. I'm Leila. Thank you for coming for this session.